It will never happen. Mom, my dad's there, but I don't need to.
Good evening. I'm Ralph Raybach, and as Vice President of the Board of Directors and a survivor of the Holocaust, including events of Kristallnacht on the 9th and 10th of November of 1938, I am honored to welcome all of you, either virtually or otherwise in person, to this commemoration of the 83rd anniversary of Kristallnacht, the November pogrom, as it's now being called, the November riot.
Good evening. I am Carly Raybach and a proud granddaughter of Ralph and a founding member of the museum's Young Professional Committee. I am honored to welcome you on behalf of Susan Abrams, our CEO, our Board of Trustees, our Board of Directors, staff, and volunteers.
Our museum is proud to serve as a partner with the Jewish United Fund and all the wonderful work that they do serving our community. We also express our special thanks to our sponsors of the evening, Philip L. and Ellen H. Glass, whose generosity supports our Holocaust commemorative series of programs. Our thanks also go to the families of Jack Hyman and Paul Hyman of blessed memory.
We wish to acknowledge our community partners for this evening: CJE Senior Life Holocaust Community Services, Sharit Hapleta of Metropolitan Chicago, German Consulate General in Chicago, Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest, KAM Isaiah Congregation, Evelyn R. Green, AJC Chicago Regional Office, Midwest Center for Jewish Learning, Yeshiva University Torah Mitzion Kollel of Chicago, and Gotha Institute Chicago. This room is filled with many who play important roles in our organization and our community. We wish to note the presence of U.S. Representative Brad Schneider and Mayor of Skokie, George Van Dusen. Thank you for your support and your attendance this evening.
83 years ago, the sounds of breaking glass shattered the air in cities throughout Germany, Austria, and Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia. While fires across these countries devoured synagogues and Jewish institutions. Over the 48 hours of November 9th and 10th, violent mobs, spurred by anti-Semitic exhortations from Nazi officials, destroyed hundreds of synagogues, including our dear, wonderful synagogue in Gotha, burning or desecrating Jewish religious artifacts along the way. All told, approximately 7,500 Jewish-owned businesses, homes, and schools were plundered, and 91 Jews were murdered, one of whom was my Uncle Salo. An additional 30,000 men were arrested and sent to concentration camps just because they were Jewish, between the ages of 16 and 60. My father was between those two ages, but he wasn't home that night when the Gestapo came, because we were in Berlin to get our visas to go to America. We were saved by the young teenage girl who did not give my father up and just said to them, "I don't know," when asked where he was.
The Night of the Broken Glass, as it came to be known, marked the end of the beginning, or perhaps the beginning of the end of persecution of the Jews by the Nazi regime. Though it is now more than 8 decades since that night in 1938, for those who experienced that night of violence, like my grandfather and his family, those decades seem like minutes. Their thoughts are never far from those whom we lost and those who were fortunate enough to survive.
We thank you. We thank you for this occasion and supporting our efforts to take history to heart and to take a stand for humanity. And that word stand is the watchword here at the museum, where we teach and train people to be upstanders.
It is now my honor to introduce Consul General of Israel to the Midwest, Yinam Cohen.
Thank you. It all started on this very night, 83 years ago, in Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. As windows were shattered and synagogues were torn apart, books burnt, and people murdered. This was the beginning of the horror that was to come, the beginning of the attempt to completely annihilate the Jews. On the dark night of Kristallnacht, 11 years old Sarah Ginzler, who lived in a small village in Hungary, had no idea how the events of November 9, 1938 would affect her life. 6 years later, during Passover, Pesach, of 1944, the Nazis stormed into Sarah's village. Sarah was 17. She was deported to Auschwitz, where she was forced to sort the belongings of her fellow Jews who were sent to the gas chambers. She helplessly watched behind a barbed wire fence as her sister walked to her death, unable to do anything to help her. That guilt stayed with Sarah as she was forced to take part in her own death march without food, water, or shelter, on her way from Auschwitz to a forced labor camp in Ravensbrück, Germany. She remained there until finally the camp was liberated in 1945. Shortly thereafter, she met her future husband, Yaakov Weizmann, who also survived the horrors of the Holocaust. They were able to start new life together and raise a family after making Aliyah to Israel. 6 years later, in 2005, I married Sarah's granddaughter, Ayelet. Our kids are the great-grandchildren of Sarah Reisman Ginzler. If Sarah had perished, we wouldn't have this family. Our family and so many other families would not exist. Sarah Reisman is still alive today and continues to be a blessing to us. But as we sadly know, this generation is disappearing. Each year, there are fewer and fewer survivors of the Holocaust among us. This tremendous loss means that our responsibility is greater. It is our generation's responsibility to take the lessons of the Holocaust and never let them go, never forget them. We now know that hate speech and incitement are transformative. It spearheaded the destruction of Jewish synagogues, stores, homes, and families. And the extent of the destruction, 6 million Jews, still impact us today. In 1939, just before World War II broke out, there were 16.6 million Jews in the world. Today, there are 15 million of us, a large number of whom live today in the Jewish state. We will never forget, and we will never forgive. We are not the ones in a moral position to forgive. But we will continue to move forward, taking the lessons of the Holocaust with us. The universal lessons of fighting hatred, racism, and xenophobia, wherever it exists. As an Israeli, I have also learned a particular lesson, that the responsibility to defend ourselves, to protect ourselves, falls on us. 80 years ago, the world was silent. We will not allow the international community to remain silent ever again. When leaders called for Israel to be wiped off the map of the world, we cannot remain silent. Today, we are a nation reestablished in our homeland of Israel. We will never let an atrocity against the Jewish people happen again. We must speak up for the Jewish people and for the Jewish state, two faiths that go hand in hand. I bring the lesson of the Holocaust with me everywhere I go, not only as a diplomat, but also as a human being. And I invite each one of you to do the same. Thank you.
It is now my honor to welcome Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, Wolfgang Messenger, to the stage. The Consul General will also introduce this evening's keynote speaker, Ambassador Michaela Kuchler.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you, Susan, Kelly, dear guests, dear friends of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. Let us pause for a moment at this point in the proceedings of this commemoration. A commemoration of an evening 83 years ago that happened all over Germany. An organized mob, far too often cheered up by ordinary Germans, killed, injured, and humiliated their fellow Jewish citizens, destroyed their property with impunity, a precursor of what was going to happen later. And every year on this fateful 9th of November, Jewish communities all over the world remember these pogroms, these murders, these atrocities. So does the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, whose raison d'etre is to remember the Holocaust and everything that led to this genocide. So tonight. And after the Consul General of the State of Israel has spoken, survivors of the Holocaust, their descendants, relatives, and friends, those who show their solidarity and respect with the Jewish people, sit here and listen to the next speaker, the Consul General of Germany. We should not take this run of the show in 2021, 83 years afterwards, as something normal, expected, and routine. No, it is for me and for all my colleagues in the German diplomatic service. It is one of the most moving moments that we are invited to such events. It is an unexpected and undeserved gift that the Jewish communities throughout the world not only accept the presence of a representative of Germany to these ceremonies, but even invite him to speak and are prepared to listen. We cannot and we will not assume this as a given. Neither will we pretend to really understand what an extraordinary overcoming it must be for survivors or their descendants to listen to the representative of the country which caused so much pain and desolation for the Jewish people and for each and every family. I can assure you we are very conscious of this generosity of your hearts and the tolerance of your minds to allow German representatives to commemorate with you the sad past, to engage together in making sure it will not be forgotten, and to commit to a common future in peace. After having said that, it is now my great honor to introduce to you at the Kristallnacht commemoration of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, my dear colleague Michaela Küchler, the Special Representative of the Federal Government for relations with Jewish organizations for issues relating to anti-Semitism, international Roma and Sinti affairs, and Holocaust remembrance. Michaela and I started our diplomatic career in 1989 in the Protocol Department of the Foreign Office. Michaela went on to her first two postings in Prague as Desk Officer for Culture and Protocol, and later to Santiago as Press Officer and Desk Officer for Economic Cooperation. Back in headquarters, she worked on economic issues related to the IMF and international economic and finance policy. As Desk Officer for the EU enlargement and our permanent representation to the EU in Brussels, she witnessed personally the accession of our eastern neighbors to the European Union. Upon her return to Berlin, she absconded from the Foreign Office for 11 years to serve as head of division in the Federal Chancellery and later in the office of the Federal President. When she returned to the Foreign Office, she served as EU legal advisor and as head of division for relations with France and the Benelux countries. Michaela assumed her current role in July 2018. Her portfolio covers a wide range of issues, including international cooperation in the fight against anti-Semitism and dialogue with Jewish organizations all over the world. As chairperson of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, she was instrumental in adopting a working definition on anti-Gypsyism, which was modeled on the working definition on anti-Semitism. She also oversaw the publication of a handbook for the practical use of the IHRA working definition on anti-Semitism that was published by the European Union during her chairmanship, and which is now widely used by many organizations and governments. I know that one of the issues very close to her heart is fighting against Holocaust distortion. The establishment of a global task force against Holocaust distortion is a lasting legacy of her work in IHRA. A native from Würzburg in Franconia, she's married with 3 children, and I may add on a personal note, a very good friend of mine. The Foreign Office could not have chosen somebody more apt for this delicate role as special representative. So please listen to what she has to say for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dear friends of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, I'd like to thank you for having invited me to your annual Kristallnacht remembrance. None of us can predict how things will turn out. No one can take offense to our holding on for as long as possible to what we have built together, and whether what we do now or in the near future is correct cannot be judged by anyone. Perhaps everything was wrong and too late. This is what Kuno Fleischer writes on January 5th, 1938, to the shareholders of his family's paper factory in Eislingen, in southwest Germany. This post from the past, presented by the Leo Baeck Institute, New York, offers us an insight into the hardships that the Jews were suffering in Germany already at the beginning of 1938, and also well before that date. The growing pressure on German Jews culminated in the November pogroms starting on October 28, which reached their climax on November 9. 83 years ago, on the evening of November 9, 1938, synagogues and other centers of the Jewish community, as well as private homes, went up in flames all over Germany, and also in Austria and Czechoslovakia. While the destruction and the attacks and lootings that accompanied it were instigated by the Nazi leadership, ordinary citizens also participated in and perpetrated these crimes. They targeted people who, in many cases, they had known for years, their colleagues, their neighbors, sometimes even their friends. It is these victims and their terrible fate that we commemorate today. Austrian President Alexander Van der Bellen once said that Auschwitz did not fall from the sky. Auschwitz ist nicht vom Himmel gefallen. Discrimination against and persecution of Jewish people occurred daily, systematically, in Germany after 1933. They were a government policy that was welcomed and implemented by far too many Germans. The Jewish Museum Berlin has gathered hundreds of regulations and decrees issued against Jews between 1933 and 1945. These measures impacted heavily on the Jewish population, thus taking a heavy toll on their mental well-being. Wilhelm Hesse, a lawyer from Hamburg, wrote the following in his diary on May 3rd, 1938. The times have become very serious. We are depressed and despondent, and therefore there is little leisure and inclination to write and take photographs as elaborately as before. Half a year later, when discrimination turned into widespread violence all over Germany, Hesse and his family decided to flee. They were lucky enough to escape to the United States. In Germany, meanwhile, the November pogroms did not mark the end of discrimination, violation of rights, limitation of profession, ban on attending Aryan schools and associations, and so on. They represented the start of the systematic persecution of the Jews and marked the beginning of the biggest genocide in Europe, the Shoah, the murder of more than 6 million European Jews. 83 years after the November pogroms, we remember those who were murdered and those who survived and are still haunted by the nightmare that they went through. Esteemed survivors, you join us today in representing all those who overcame the horrors of the Holocaust. I promise you that we will not forget your testimonies. I can only imagine how painful it can be for you to recount your experiences. You are doing this to help make young people immune to the allure of evil. Permit me to thank you most sincerely for this. Esteemed survivors, so many of you have extended the hand of reconciliation to my country over the years. I'm profoundly grateful also for this. Remembrance and the lessons we draw from it cannot end. We will always remember those who were murdered and those who survived. We will do everything we can to ensure that the legacy of the murdered men, women, and children is firmly etched in the memory of humanity. Today, it is not only our duty to remember crimes committed in past, but to prevent and combat their resurgence and to stop them from happening again in the future. Germany plays an active role domestically and internationally in countering and combating anti-Semitism. We established the position of Federal Government Commissioner for Jewish Life in Germany and the fight against anti-Semitism. Felix Klein, whom some of you know, is currently in this role. He is part of a network of 16 commissioners at the level of the 16 Länder. Besides providing training for the police, justice personnel, and teachers, as well as promoting the prosecution of criminal acts of anti-Semitism, Germany has also reformed its penal code. It has enshrined anti-Semitism as a motivation that aggravates a penal punishment, and ruled, among other things, that the burning of the Israeli flag and the use of Hamas symbols are punishable offenses. Germany has a network to which victims of anti-Semitic incidents, including those that are not punishable by law, can turn. Institutions such as the Anne Frank Educational Center in Frankfurt provide legal and psychological assistance. We are very concerned about the anti-Semitic and racist murders that took place in Kassel, Halle, and Hanau in 2019, and also about the planned anti-Semitic attack on a synagogue in Hagen on Yom Kippur. The anti-Israel protests in connection with the Gaza conflict that took place in May this year were likewise deeply troubling. We have established a program totaling more than €1 billion in the period up to 2024 for countering right-wing extremism and racism. At the international level, we have initiated and financed the Turning Words into Action program, contributed to a publication on the practical use of the working definition of anti-Semitism of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and adopted a declaration of the Ministers for Justice and for Home Affairs at EU level on mainstreaming the fight against anti-Semitism in all policy areas. Today, we are also faced with the greatest contemporary threat to the legacy of the Holocaust: Holocaust distortion. Let me give you some examples. At school board meetings in the United States, parents mockingly gave the Nazi salute to express their opposition to mask mandates for students. Public health officials campaigning to improve vaccination rates have been compared to the Nazi brown shirts and the Nazi doctor Josef Mengele. In the Czech Republic, France, and in my own country, Germany, in Italy, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom, protesters have worn yellow stars badges proclaiming "not vaccinated" at demonstrations against COVID-19 measures. Until recently, such badges could be purchased on Amazon. All around the world, opponents of COVID-19 measures invoke and distort the Holocaust to paint themselves as victims and their governments as oppressive regimes. I know that also in Chicago, there were similar incidents last year. These comparisons are clearly false, inappropriate, and offensive to the victims and survivors of the Holocaust. And yet, they are becoming more mainstream. Holocaust distortion affects us all. We all have a responsibility to act. That is why the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the European Commission, the United Nations, and UNESCO joined together to launch Protect the Facts, based on the findings of the Global Task Force Against Holocaust Distortion, established under Germany's presence of the IHRA. It is the first global, multilingual, awareness-raising social media campaign on recognizing and countering Holocaust distortion. Protect the Facts empowers individuals from a variety of contexts, such as political stakeholders, civil society, and the general public. There are also some simple things that we can do right now. Encourage our networks to visit the website againstholocaustdistortion.org to learn more about Holocaust distortion, to find resources on the topic, and to download and share social media assets. On social media, use the campaign hashtags Protect the Facts and Say No to Distortion. Let us join forces to stop Holocaust distortion in its tracks. Let us protect the facts. Let me conclude by thanking you for all your efforts and all your work to tell the story of the men, women, and children who were murdered by the Nazis, and the story of those who survived. The Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center is a flagship institution which upholds the truth about the Holocaust. More than anything else, it is the people who work at and who care about the museum who really matter. So let me thank the staff, the leadership, and the volunteers of the museum, including Susan Abrams, CEO, and Jordan Lamb, Chair, Board of Directors. My heartfelt thanks go to you, the survivor community, and the children and grandchildren of the survivors, including tonight's MC survivor and Museum Board Vice President Ralph Rehbock and his granddaughter and YPC member Carly Rehbock, as well as this evening's memorial candle lighters. I also include my colleagues, Consuls General Wolfgang Mössinger and Yinam Cohen from Israel. Thank you all for your dedication.
Now it is my pleasure to introduce Museum CEO Susan Abrams to the stage as she leads us in our candle lighting ceremony.
Good evening, everyone, both here in the room and the hundreds who are joining us virtually. We're glad to be together for this meaningful and moving evening. And I must just start, though, with a heartfelt thank you to our wonderful partners who were listed by Carly and in this room with us who spoke so beautiful, the Consuls General of Israel and Germany, Inam and Wolfgang. Thank you for your meaningful words, and what a privilege. I heard a murmur of, oh, that was beautiful, to hear from Ambassador Kukler. So we are grateful for that opportunity. And Wolfgang, thank you for your help in securing the ambassador to offer those important remarks. And thank you to each of your teams too, who we enjoy so much working with, and we're so grateful for that partnership and support. I'm honored now to participate in the candle lighting part of this evening. And we're going to start with Ralph Rehbock. Ralph was born in Gotha, Germany, as you heard. His father was able to avoid arrest following Kristallnacht by going into hiding until the family was able to immigrate to the United States in December 1938. Ralph is joined by his granddaughter, Carly, who serves as education chair, as you heard, of our Young Professionals Committee. Thank you, Ralph and Carly. Doris Vogel was born in Berlin, Germany. She and her mother found refuge in Shanghai, where they remained for 9 years before immigrating to the United States. Carol is joined this evening by Carol Kane, whose father and his brother were arrested following Kristallnacht and imprisoned in Sachsenhausen. The family was able to secure their release, and they immigrated to the U.S. via England. Carol's mother and grandmother owned a small shop, which was claimed by a neighbor following Kristallnacht, and they were evicted. They too secured visas and immigrated to the United States soon after. Candle number 3. Kurt Goodfriend was born in Vienna, Austria. Kurt's father was deported to a forced labor camp and never returned. Kurt, along with his mother, was deported to Terezin, where they remained until liberation. Kurt is joined by his daughter, Leslie Cohn, who is also a cherished museum volunteer. Our fourth candle. Eric Rauscher is the son of survivor Walter Rauscher from Oślin, Czechoslovakia in Sudetenland. The Rauschers were expelled from the Sudetenland in the early winter of 1938 and spent time in a refugee camp before finding refuge in Manila, the Philippines, in late 1939. Eric is joined by Ron Koppel, whose father Werner was born in Mers, Germany. After being deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, Werner spent nearly 2 years as a forced laborer at Auschwitz III, the Buna Monowitz factory. After escaping from a death march, Werner met a German, half-Jewish nurse named Trudy, whom he married soon after. Candle number 5. Ellie Marar was born in Lauterecken, Germany, where she experienced rising anti-Semitism until her family immigrated to the United States before the start of the war. Ellie is joined by her grandson, Michael Marar, who is a member of our Young Professionals Committee. Candle number 6. Gary Thalheimer is the son of Holocaust survivors Walter and Eva Thalheimer. He is joined by his sons, Jason and Dan, the grandsons of Walter and Eva, as well as Holocaust survivors Maury and Sally Mangerton. Thank you to all of our candle lighters this evening. And now it is my pleasure to invite to the stage Cantor David Berger from KAM Isaiah Israel Congregation and scholar in residence at the American Conference of Cantors.
If it's comfortable, I invite you to rise.
Hametzai menucha nechona tachat kanafei hashechina b'malot kedawa shiyim uteyorim kizar arakia mazeirim lenishmot achaynu v'achiotayanu shenitbechu b'shawa anashim nashim v'taf shenheregu v'shenachneku v'shenisrefu v'shenikberu chayim v'ganei Eden בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתו. בעל הרחמים, אסיריים בסייעת כנפך, לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים, את נשמותיהם. Adonai hu nachalatam veyanuchu v'shalom. על משכבותיהם ונאמר Amen. God, filled with mercy, dwelling in the high places, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure who shine like the glow of the firmament, to the souls of all our brethren who were slaughtered in the Shoah, men, women, and children who were murdered and suffocated, burned to ashes, and buried alive. May they find rest in the Garden of Eden. Please, Master of Mercy, cover them in the eternal shelter of your wings. Bind their souls up in the bonds of life. The eternal is their inheritance. May they rest in peace, and let us all say together, Amen. We join in words of mourners Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yom echon, u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemeh tekudsha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechmata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. May the source of peace, who creates harmony in the heavens, teach us here below to sing that same sacred melody of peace and fellowship for us, for all Israel, for all the world, to which we can all say, Amen. Thank you.
We thank all of you for being here with us for this commemoration, either virtually or in person. And we wish you
a good night and be safe. Thank you for coming.